This is 11 News at 10. It all begins with 11 minutes of non-stop news.
Armed and checking every lead.
Pistol. He calmly reloaded and then started firing again.
People are getting killed and drugs going around, gangs.
Manpower couldn't prevent a 39-year-old victim from being shot in the chest.
We're going to have to do something. This got to stop.
My perception has always been that it's really not all that bad. I just think it's been blown way out of proportion by the media.
Through blood everywhere, along with shell casings.
We need to go back to public executions. We need to put the fear back in the hearts of the criminals.
It's with us every day. News of murders, assaults, armed robberies, carjackings, and kidnappings seems to permeate our lives. It's no wonder people live in fear and believe crime is the nation's #1 problem.
Camera on the face. They're still trying to piece the details together of this.
Sometimes television makes a bad situation worse.
They are identifying the suspect as a 35-year-old white male.
The more citizens are concerned about killings that take place, the more news producers are going to feature those stories on the news. Well, the more you see them on the news, the more citizens are concerned. And the more citizens are concerned, the more the news media are going to focus on it.
It becomes a vicious circle. And even when statistics come out saying crime is going down, television images like these leave a far greater impression than the numbers.
I will end early release of criminals and end parole altogether for rapists and child molesters.
Taking a cue from the television news, politicians have found that it's still an issue that hits a hot button with voters.
These hardened criminals will never again murder, rape, or deal drugs.
There is a populist strain to American politics that makes crime a very attractive issue. If the only question is, are you on the side of victims or on the side of burglars, it's pretty easy to choose up sides.
The reality of crime goes beyond political rhetoric.
The first thing that happens is that if we're not very specific about what it is that we're trying to prevent, we can't make good policy. What we're scared about is not that people are going to steal our cars, because we have car insurance for that. What we're scared about is that people are going to carjack our cars, that we're going to be shot on the street. I teach at a university in California, the home of the nation's toughest and craziest three-strikes law. And it's a crazy law because it will now send up for life terms burglars as well as robbers. Well, it turns out that robbery is 50 times as likely to lead to a victim's death, each robbery, as is each burglary.
Got 2 TVs and a microwave. They could just check.
If you want to minimize crime, then you want to throw everybody in jail. And, well, if you're treating burglars like robbers, so what? If what you're trying to do is minimize the deadliness of crime, you want to do exactly the opposite. Create as big a gap between the way in which you punish burglary and the way in which you punish robbery as you can.
A child is sexually assaulted and killed. A policeman is gunned down. Houses are burglarized. Kids are using drugs, and the reaction is almost the same.
Crack down harder on all the people who are breaking the law.
You don't know how to keep your children safe anymore.
Help build another jail.
Many states are building more prisons as the call goes out for harsher penalties for criminals.
We've come to simply rely on the prison as a way of getting people we consider criminals off the streets.
In 1973, we had about 215,000 people locked up in American prisons. We now have more than 5 times as many people locked up in American prisons. When you total prisons and jails together, you're up at 1,600,000 and counting. And year in, year out, whether the crime rate is going up or going down, the rate of imprisonment has been going up.
To combat violent crime, over half the states have passed what is known as truth in sentencing measures. They require those convicted to serve at least 85% of their sentence. Since then, many of those states have seen a decrease in their crime rate.
The reason for this is to try to put some deterrent effect back into the criminal justice system. It once was there, and it's been gone for some time. We've had criminals going through a revolving door, and most of the violent crimes in this country are committed by repeat offenders. They're not committed by a new person.
I think that the harsher sentencing will definitely continue, and the reason that will continue is we're seeing actual results which come from studies seeing a dramatic reduction in some violent crime. Not only is it cheaper to lock people up because you don't have the re-victimization, the re-adjudication, but the pain and suffering is reduced dramatically.
But you're going to let them out, and you're going to let almost all of them out. And so then the question is, in what condition do you want them to be when they're released?
Until recently, inmates at Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla were taught high school completion courses and vocational courses. They also could complete 2 years of community college. Pressured by complaints that prisoners were provided more than people on the outside, the legislature eliminated high school diplomas and college courses. Money was the reason cited for cutting back the educational program at Walla Walla.
In this institution, it costs approximately $25,000 a year to keep a guy locked up. I have a friend on our main campus that sent her son to Harvard for $27,000 a year. It doesn't make very much sense to me to spend that kind of money on an inmate and not try to prepare him to be released. For 20 years, I've been listening to legislators and critics say that why should we be spending money for convicts to get a college education when they've committed these horrible crimes or whatever? It seems like they're getting some kind of reward. They need to be able to read and write. They need to be able to talk civilly. They need to be able to balance a checkbook, fill out a job application, have some sense about how to dress when they go into a job interview, have some skills. You know, we can't just take a generation of people and flush their lives down the toilet because we're mad at them for firing a gun or something or using drugs.
It is literally obscene not to have drug treatment programs when you have more than 300,000 people locked up because of their participation in illegal drugs. We don't have a Siberia. The people we send to prison, they send back.
And many claim that what they're like when they come back depends on what happens when they're behind bars. The National Correctional Recreation Association believes in relieving prisoners' tensions with sports and recreation programs.
We use inmates as scorekeepers, referees, and umpires, and they actually have to take the responsibility for making the calls and taking the heat from the other inmates, their friends that they have to go back and cell with. They do learn to play within the rules, so to speak, whether it's rules of society on the street or just basketball rules on the gym floor.
How successful are these programs? Are those who participate less likely to become repeat offenders?
Well, recreation and rehabilitation really have little to do with each other. Education is very important, and I think most of all, when the prisoner comes out, placing that prisoner into the right setting and environment, getting him a job or her a job, is very, very important, and then following through afterwards. And that doesn't happen very often in this country.
You're already seeing a fair proportion of next year's criminals and the year after in this year's prison system, so that anything that you can do, particularly in juvenile justice settings, but also in adult correctional settings, that is going to reduce return rates to crime, is going to give you very solid returns. But we don't have time to think about that. All we've really been able to do in this period of explosively high growth is keep up with the bond issues and the hammers and nails and hire the guards and staff the new facilities that we need.
Punishment needs to fit the crime. I'm for the death penalty. I think that's a big issue.
I think it's archaic. I don't think it solves any problems, and it doesn't make me as a human being feel better.
I think certain crimes deserve it, certain heinous crimes.
People often say that we have the death penalty in this country, but that oversimplifies the situation. I think that it actually would be fairer to say that there are 5 separate regimes with regard to the death penalty. First of all, there's a group of states, about a dozen, that don't have it at all. Some of them, like Wisconsin and Michigan, have never had it. The second group of states has simply never executed anybody, and that includes New Jersey, plus 2 states, New York and Kansas, that have just gotten the death penalty very recently and haven't used it. The third group of states, which includes California and Illinois and a lot of Midwestern and Western states, they've got the death penalty and they have used it, but they haven't used it much at all. And the fourth group consists of a group of states in the Old South and border states that use it quite a bit. And the fifth and last category is Texas, which stands all by itself. It just uses it a lot.
Texas administers the death penalty by lethal injection. Other states use the gas chamber, the electric chair, even firing squads. But does putting someone to death constitute cruel and unusual punishment? Does it violate the 8th Amendment of the Constitution?
I believe the death penalty is cruel and unusual punishment. Whenever we talk of imprisoning a human being for 23.5 hours a day in an area the size of a bathroom, that most of us, I think, would consider keeping our dog or our cat for 23.5 hours a day in such a tight confinement, cruel and unusual. But to then do that and warehouse a person to someday when they will then be executed, I think is terribly cruel and unusual in and of itself.
The anti-death penalty movement, for instance, argues that life imprisonment is more of a harsh sentence than the death penalty, and that's what they prescribe. If they believe that the death penalty is per se cruel and unusual, why would they suggest a more cruel and unusual punishment to take its place?
In general, I think you would have to say that the Supreme Court has held that the death penalty is not as such cruel and unusual. What they have done, though, is to hold that particular uses of the death penalty would be cruel and unusual. In one case, for example, the Supreme Court held that imposing the death penalty for rape was cruel and unusual. And ever since that case, basically speaking, the death penalty is available only for murder.
In the 1972 case of Furman versus Georgia, the Supreme Court ruled that the manner in which states administered the death penalty violated the 8th and 14th Amendments to the Constitution.
In Furman versus Georgia, a bare majority of the Supreme Court decided that all existing death penalty statutes were no good. They were cruel and unusual because they were random, they were arbitrary, there was no guidance given to juries.
The court did not rule that capital punishment was unconstitutional, merely the arbitrary way in which the states were carrying it out. In response to the court, many states rewrote their laws, prescribing the death penalty for a limited category of specific crimes. Some states imposed new sentencing standards. In the 1976 case of Gregg versus Georgia, the Supreme Court took another look at the death penalty as it had been rewritten in Georgia.
It set up a very complicated scheme in which a person who's accused of a capital crime, if they're convicted, the jury has to find aggravating circumstances, there are special appeals, special procedures, and the Supreme Court said that's all right. They accepted that statute, and so the other states that wanted to have a death penalty then modeled their statutes more or less on that, and that's the way it's been to this date.
Even though the court has ruled that capital punishment is constitutional, many still maintain it is cruel and unusual. They cite several problems with carrying it out.
This is not the first time that the electric chair has malfunctioned.
Flame erupted all across the top of his head, like from cross this way from one ear to the other.
We've also seen the mixture, the 3 chemicals used in lethal injection, be reversed in order. And if the anesthesia doesn't kick in first, if the person's lungs implode first or the massive heart attack is induced first and they're still wide awake, that is a horrible, horrible way to die.
When we're talking about the actual physical act of putting someone to death, be it lethal injection, hanging, or electrocution, there will be cases, and there have been, and there will in the future be cases where the execution does not go as smoothly as everyone involved would like it to go.
We charge you with homicide.
This is not the basis for getting rid of a punishment.
Others say the methods used for execution make it too easy for the condemned. That nothing could be too cruel for the individuals who murdered their loved ones in cold blood, and to give them life in prison instead is a slap in the face to the victims and their families.
That means that they go down to prison, that they get 3 good meals a day, they get a clean bed to sleep on. It means that their families come down and visit with them. Under some circumstances, they even have conjugal visits with their sweethearts. When you've got someone dead, 1 or more people dead and cold in the grave, that doesn't seem to me like that's justice, like that's adequate punishment.
Some argue that the death penalty is racist.
The death penalty has always been disproportionately imposed on racial minorities. And in fact, it still is the case. But the Supreme Court, in a highly controverted decision, which they decided on the narrowest basis, 5-4, in a case called McCleskey versus Kemp, they were presented with statistical data which went to show that the death penalty was imposed more often if the victim was white. That is, killing a white person was way more likely to get you a death penalty than killing a black person. And the Supreme Court obviously found this statistical fact very troubling, but when push came to shove, they decided that unless the defendant could show racial bias in his particular case, that they would not allow that statistical finding to upset the operation of the death penalty system.
Some argue there is always a chance that the wrong person may be executed. In February 1997, the American Bar Association stated that the risk of innocent people being executed had grown too large. It called for a moratorium on executions.
Many times you have a witness, whether it's a jailhouse snitch or a co-defendant, a person who has a lot to gain by perjuring themselves will be the primary witness against somebody at trial. And juries routinely believe that person. A man who has a reason to lie is automatically assumed to be telling the truth.
13,000 people, innocent people, are killed in this country every year by people on parole and probation. And I find it somewhat surprising, all of the attention on death row, millions of dollars and thousands of man-hours spent every year fighting at most the execution of 56 people who have the most extensive due process afforded any criminal defendant in the world. Yet those same people are not willing to push for laws to stop the slaughter of the innocents in our streets.
But does the fear of getting the death penalty deter anyone from committing murder? There is no agreement here either.
Think of all the people who sat around thinking about doing murder who might not have done it because they were worried they might get the death penalty, and if it's more certain that they're going to, swiftness and certainty of punishment being very important here, then I think they're less likely to commit that kind of heinous crime, and that's true for lesser crimes as well.
The only person who really calculates the cost-benefit analysis would be someone like a contract murderer. Those people are few and far between. So the death penalty does not serve as a deterrent and is really only justified on grounds of retribution or vengeance.
As far as the deterrence argument goes, no, it's not a deterrent. There's never been any statistical evidence to even suggest that it's a deterrent, and in fact, there may be some suggestions that it has the opposite effect. You institutionalize murder revenge when you have a legal death penalty, and people carry that over into their personal lives to a certain extent.
Regardless of whether one considers the death penalty a deterrent, an act of vengeance, justice for those who commit heinous crimes, or cruel and unusual punishment, it seems likely that capital punishment will continue in the United States. As we approach the 21st century, U.S. prisoners are being executed in record numbers.
Over the last 50 years, putting aside only the United States, execution of criminals has disappeared from the civilized, industrialized Western world. Every single European country has abolished the death penalty. Everywhere else in the developed Western world, people are talking about executions as if they're an anachronism. That doesn't mean that there aren't countries that execute in the world. There are some big ones: China, Iran, Iraq. It means there's an almost perfect correlation in the world between human rights abuses and the presence or absence of capital punishment.
As the end neared, death penalty opponents gathered in the street near the death house.
The death row mothers say they will stay all night, awaiting word on the execution.
He was pronounced dead 23 minutes after being strapped to the death chamber gurney.
You got your criminal? Don't waste my tax dollars putting him in jail. I'm feeding the guy. Kill him.
Obviously want to change the circus atmosphere that tends to surround executions when they're
Tonight at
conducted.
6 p.m., the state of Texas will conduct its 29th execution this year. 38-year-old Johnny Cochran will die by lethal injection.
It was armed robbery and murder. It was in a little town called DeKalb, Texas.
On the day of the execution, the inmate is brought into the cell, shackled, and he is unshackled at the cell door, strip search, put in the cell. This is several hours before the execution, which will schedule to take place at 6 o'clock. Then at 6 o'clock, if there are no stays or any clemency, then the warden will go to the cell, tell the inmate it's time. At that time, he will walk from the cell unshackled into the death chamber, where he gets on a gurney, is strapped down to the gurney. The tie-down team then leaves the execution chamber, leaving in there only the warden standing at the head of the inmate, the chaplain standing down at his feet, and the inmate strapped to the gurney.
No, this woman lived way out there in the country. I had this little country store, and I pretty much knew her procedure. She cashed a lot of checks, stuff like that. So, no, I planned it for about 2 weeks. And then I just, went and done it one morning.
Then the drug team will then come out of the drug room adjacent to the gurney, establish an IV in each arm, and then as soon as that is done, then they go back into the drug room, close the door. At that time, the witnesses are then brought in, victim's family first, then as soon as they're secured in the room, then the offender's family is brought into the other witness room and secured. As soon as they're in and secured, then the director or one of his deputies who will be standing in for him will open the door to the drug room and tell the warden, you may proceed.
I planned on killing her. Yeah, she knew who I was, and I knew she'd open the door for me, so I went up there and told her I'd run out of gas. She opened up the door. I was strung out on methamphetamines. That's what I robbed her for, to get the money.
As soon as the director says, you may proceed, then the warden says to the inmate, you may make your last statement. And then as soon as he's concluded his last statement, then the warden indicates to the drug team to commence the lethal injections.
Well, it was just pretty much cut and dried. There was a guy that dropped me off and picked me up. That's what put me at the scene of the crime and everything else. And I think it didn't last very long, 2 or 3 days, something like that. But I look at it, I knew what was going to happen whenever I did it, you know what I mean? So whenever I was tried, you know, it really didn't surprise me one way or another.
The sodium thiopentothal is a anesthetic that is the same thing that you would get in a surgical setting, and that puts the inmate immediately to sleep.
I denied it all the way up till 1990. And then I gave my life to the Lord in 1990 and started living my life for the Lord.
Then the second drug is pancurium bromide, and that's used to slow the respiration. In this setting, it paralyzes the diaphragm in the dosage that is administered, which stops the breathing.
The Lord started putting it on my heart, you know, that I had to tell the truth, you know. So I came out there and told my lawyers I wanted to be represented like that, and I told my mom and them that I was guilty.
And then the final chemical is potassium chloride, which stops the heart.
Well, it's biblical. It's the law. It's, you know, the law of the state of Texas, and it's God established death penalty back in, you know, the beginning. You know what I mean? It ain't never changed. Man's the only thing that's changed things.
As soon as that is done, it takes about 1.5 to 2 minutes. They indicate to the warden that the lethal injection has been completed, and then the warden will wait about 3 minutes. Then a physician will come into the room, will examine the inmate and pronounce death. The warden will repeat the time of death over the microphone that goes into the witness rooms.
Well, I'd just like to tell the victim's family, you know, that I'm sorry for the pain and suffering I caused them. And I thank the Lord that He gave me time in my life to come to know Him before I die.
The tie-down team comes in with a gurney from the funeral home, unstrap the inmate from the gurney, and place him on the funeral home gurney, and then they remove the body to the funeral home, and that's really the end of the process.